let's extend that problem that we saw in the previous video. So, in the previous video, we saw that we could go from O to C by going along B and then along A. We also saw that we could go from P to M by subtracting 4/5 of A, then adding B, and then adding half of A, as M was the midpoint. We tidied that up to give us minus 3/10 of A plus B. Okay, so that's what we know so far. The question I now want to ask is, how far along the vector O to C is the point S where these two lines intersect? Or to word it another way, what is the vector OS? So, how are we going to approach this problem? We know that the vector OS is some proportion of the way along O to C. So I'm going to write that as k lots of A plus B. Remember, we can write that in any order. So it's some proportion of the way along that line. But we also know that it's some proportion of the way along the line P to M. So what we need to do is we need to think, how can I get to S in two different ways? One way is to just say, you can get there by going straight along there. Or another way to get there is to go along O to P, so that is 4/5 of A, and then some proportion along the line P to M. So it's some proportion of this. It may be a different proportion to K, so I need to use a different letter. Let's use M. Okay, so we've looked for two different ways to arrive at S, travelling along those two vectors which travel across and meet at S. Okay, so if in maths we know that two things are actually describing the same, we can write them as if they're equal to each other, because they are both OS. So we know that k lots of A plus B is equal to 4/5 of A plus minus 3m over 10 lots of A, just taking my A terms and writing them together, plus m lots of B. Okay, so we know that these two vectors must be equal. How can we solve it though? Because we've got A's and we don't really know what A is, and we've got B's, we don't really know what B is, and we've got K's and M's and we don't know those numbers either. So it appears we've got too many unknowns in this equation here. However, we do know that the only way to move across in this question is by travelling along B. Similarly, the only way to move up in this question is to travel along A. We know they must both move up and across the same amount. So what we can say is that these up parts, the A's, must be equal to each other because they both started at O and both finished at S. So KA must be exactly the same as 4/5 of A minus 3m tenths of A. They must be the same. Similarly, the B's, the acrosses, must be the same. So I know that KB must equal m lots of B. That's good, because what that's telling me is that K and M must be the same number, because B is the same vector. That's excellent. I can just substitute my K into here to get MA is equal to 4/5 of A minus 3m over 10 lots of a, so 10. Everything has an a in it, so I know that m must equal 4/5 minus 3m over 10. And now I can just solve this. Add in the 3/10 over to here. I'm going to get 13m over 10 is equal to 4/5, multiplying through by 10, dividing by 13, I get that m, and therefore k, is equal to 8/13. So what that's told me is that s, going back to here, is 8/13 of the way along OC, because remember, I said that it was some proportion of the way along. So final answer to my question, if I just clear a bit of space here, is that O to S was k lots of A plus B, and I know that k was 8/13. So therefore it's told me that point S is 8/13 of the way along that line. I have a vector for OS. Okay, key points then. We said that it was some fraction of the way along the line, either k times AB by going some fraction of the way along there, or starting at the same point so that we can set them equal to each other later. I could see it as going to P and then P to M, stopping some fraction of the way along that line. Different letters because they may be different fractions. I then equate the A's, knowing I must have the same amount of A vector. I then equate the B's, knowing I must have the same amount of B vectors, and I solve simultaneous equations to reach my solution. Those are probably the hardest type of question, but as long as you follow those key steps, you should be able to answer anything that they throw at you.